Welcome to At Home is Now. My name is Wanaka Oberhuber, and I'm your host. My guest today is Justin Anderson. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So happy you came. So I have a question that you can take your time to answer as long as you like. What are you most excited about at present, and how does it contribute to your joy and happiness?
Um, well, for me right now, and that's a pretty easy one. I currently have twins on the way. They should be here this month in about 2 weeks, give or take a little bit more, maybe. And it's a real joy just being able to grow my family and watch, something that you created grow and become a person. And I'm just excited to meet my new children. I'm having a boy and a girl. So this will be my first girl. So I'm excited to be a girl dad and experience that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What else are you excited about?
Um, I'm also excited about the fact that I've been interfacing and talking with some therapists that are engaging with my work um, in different ways. This is allowing me to see if my work could be utilized as maybe a bridge to helping people who aren't quite certain if they want to enter therapy, uh, figure that out and basically almost like a self help until they are ready to enter therapy. This is something I was interested in because when I first started, um, growing and dealing with my mental health, depression and things, my mental illness, uh, there wasn't anything that was there to help me in the way that I needed help. So creating something and trying to build something for other people who need the things that I needed has been something that's been bringing me real joy. In the fact that therapists are looking at it and taking it seriously. It's not just, something that's being written off has been really um, impacting and powerful for me.
So, when you're referencing your work, what are you speaking of for those who don't know?
Um, I am currently writing a dark fantasy story with the power system being mental health. Um, I pretty much it went from writing a fantasy story to building a whole universe unexpectedly. So there's a couple different avenues that you can enter my universe from. Again, I am currently writing a novel, but I also write and post folklore on my website that I tend to have voiced by actual voice actors. Is another avenue to learn about my world, to enter my world. And then I'm currently also working on a more clinical side that's, how do I want to word it? That would be in conjunction with actual therapists and clinicians to make sure that the phrasings, the way that it's structured would be not at risk for re traumatizing or harming anyone mentally. So while there still is creativeness and a creative level I own to that, that would be more rule bound to making sure the words using, whether than using something like cut, it would be replaced with something that would be less likely to re-traumatize someone if they do have trauma from those types of injuries or those types of wounds. So I'm kind of working on multiple levels here, but the core of it all is to allow people to enter a universe where grief, where trauma, and invisible weight is understood, and where it can help them understand themselves.
So the world building is through writing mainly, or is it other? You were speaking of voice actors who were also um, putting it out there. So how does this work? This world building, and how you said there's multiple ways to enter that world, and
Yes,
how can you find how can one find help through that process? Because you were saying it's meant to help people um, go not get traumatized on the one hand and also get find help in helpful ways of seeing things and moving forward, right?
correct. So glad you asked. So when it comes to mental health, uh, I try to touch on it because for a lot of people, there's a few things that we understand. Like mental health awareness is something that is widely known. We have, mental health months. We talk about it. Jobs push it. We're told to take care of our mental health. But the things that we don't hear a lot about is therapy or therapy awareness. So for most people, they believe therapy is just one thing. I basically, signed up for therapy. I got a therapist. I went to this therapist, and whether me and this therapist works out or not, um, they come to the conclusion that maybe therapy wasn't for them or is for them. For the ones who find a therapist, they didn't click, they may try another therapist. And if that therapist doesn't work, then a lot of times they believe therapy doesn't work for them. The issue with that is that it may be a mix of not just the therapist, but the therapy framework, because there's multiple frameworks or multiple types of therapy. There's CBT, there's IFS, there's ACT, there's continuous bonds, there's narrative therapy, and all these therapies, they work differently, and uh, one may click with you better than the other, and that's what I ended up finding out when I therapy who whole philosophy is externalizing. So for me, that came out through writing different folklores and writing this novel. I was able to write these characters, and I started noticing the characters were carrying weight that I felt inside, and they were carrying that weight. And I started to notice that these characters resemble some of the actions that I was thinking or that I would take. And it allowed me to externalize these emotions, this grief, this trauma, and process it outside of myself. And this is along the lines of like narrative therapy or IFS, internal family systems. And this allowed me to carry this weight differently. And so as I continued to write my novel and I started writing folklore to, um, when I would see different events, I may see, someone dealing with their own trauma and talking about it, maybe the loss of a mother, the loss of a child or something. I would feel these really deep emotions and I would need to do something with them. So I would turn those instances into folklore. And what has grown from that is that I believe right now on my page, I may have close to 20 folklore. They're not all voiced, but I've had, you know, up where they can at least be read. Some of them are voiced, that touch on different types of grief or occupational weights, like caregivers or caretakers. It talks about the weight that they carry, survivor guilt from a firefighter. It talks about the weight that they carry, after the job is done. I have one about pregnancy loss. And what I've started to notice is that people in those fields or who've experienced that type of trauma or grief are resonating with that work because it's allowing them to view this pain that they've experienced over their life outside of themselves, and it's a realization that someone else sees it and someone else understands, where before you just feel very alone because you feel like maybe you're the only one trapped in this horrible space. And this is what my world has become, and what I've built. The folklore has been really built to assist other people, that for them not to feel alone, for them to understand that there's other people who've experienced and they are seen, even if you don't feel like you're being seen. There's someone out there who understands and who sees you and sees the weight that you're carrying.
Wow, I think that's a really significant what you're saying there. Is one thing is to know that you're not alone, because that's a huge, huge step. Because usually you start out thinking you're alone, you're the only one, you're special, you're particular, whatever else, whatever ideas you have around that, and then to realize you're not alone. And then the next step, I think, is to realize there's so many people who can understand, right? First, you think maybe it's a few people who have had similar experience. You're a special group of people who have a special type of experience. And then it can expand to realizing, oh my God, there's so many people who understand. And that is all really helpful, because then you can start connecting, speaking about it, feeling more comfortable that it's okay to speak about it if other people speak
Hmm.
about it as well. And so I think there's so many levels to that. And I also thought of there's so many therapy forms, like you said, you just named like 3 or 4, but there's so many more. So yes, you're right. It doesn't mean that if one therapy form or one therapist doesn't work, that there may not be another way, right?
Yep.
And of course, it's still a decision to go to therapy, a general decision. But you're right, one shouldn't, because one form doesn't work or one certain therapist doesn't work, doesn't mean that therapy is nothing for you. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And another thing you were saying about writing letting it out, and you're using imagination for it. You're not just writing exactly what happened, but you're allowing the whole emotions and all the other aspects of it to characterize themselves and express themselves.
Correct. And that came out because, again, sometimes it's easier to hold things if they're a different shape. Like, for example, think about water. If you try to hold water in a liquid form, it just runs through your finger. But if it's frozen, you can hold it more easier. And I think that's where me writing, fantasy as opposed to, or dark fantasy specifically, um, which, as opposed to just writing what I felt, made the biggest difference. I chose dark fantasy as the, you know, vessel because, unlike fantasy or romance or different things, there's a level of willingness to sit with some darker themes or thoughts, where with fantasy I couldn't explore those themes as much or as deeply as I felt I would like. Um, and it's not to make everything bleak, but I feel like a lot of times we sanitize what trauma and grief is really like. And we try to make it shorter or tell people it should be shorter than what it is for some of us. And I wanted to express that through my writing, that your journey could be very different from mine, and it could be very different from the very next person next to you. And that's where, for me, it became really important to write this in a way that it allows people to see their own grief, their own trauma or suffering, but not to tell them exactly how to deal with it. A lot of my folklores acknowledge that you're carrying weight, acknowledge that it hurts, acknowledge that this may be a loss and this may affect you in this particular way, but it doesn't tell you everything is just okay. It's going to be all sunshines and rainbows afterwards, or this is how you deal with it, because how I deal with it and how you deal with it could be vastly two different things. And I didn't want people to feel, I wanted to try to make it where as many people could feel understood as possible, as opposed to just a small subset.
Yeah, I think the fantasy or being able to explore things with your makes it a lot many things accessible to many people, because sometimes to put the things in the harsh, stark, realistic way is too much. So I personally think you can find a lot of relief when you read or things that are fantasy wise, because they allow, for many people, not everyone is that way, but for many people it allows them to explore the thoughts and the emotions without getting so close to it as it would be if it were very realistic. And so they can allow the emotions to come up without being totally absorbed by them.
Yep, that's completely correct.
So that's something I've discovered, and I personally think writing is wonderful. I've written, I write as well, and I really explore that. So I think it's really valuable.
And that's that is extremely true. Some of the things that I tried to, after I started doing this writing and I started realizing how it was helping me, as you said, one of the things that writing and doing fantasy can do is distance the problem from your day. It's called distancing. So you can distance yourself from the problem to be able to process it better. And that allowed, this writing allowed me to do that. It also allowed me to start realizing some of the frictions that people may have with going into therapy. And I acknowledge that therapy may not be for everyone. But what I heard from a lot of people uh, wasn't so much that therapy wasn't for them, as certain aspects of it bothered them. And those are what I grew to see as friction points, uh, that from being inside the field, therapists may not realize. Uh, one of the friction points that I seen was the retelling of the trauma or re-traumatizing themselves while trying to find the right therapist, because you're going in with trauma or a problem and you're telling this therapist to, in hopes that you can work through it, and then if this therapist isn't the right fit, then you're going to a new therapist and reopening that wound again that you haven't worked through. And again, if you go to another therapist, now you've dug into this wound 3 times and you haven't had anyone there to help you work through it. That was definitely one of the friction points I seen when talking to people. And this is where, working with therapists, I've been trying to figure out different ways of, okay, is there a way to do this in a that and there is there a way to do this where we can eliminate the friction. And I started working on a small little project I called the Threaded Journal, that you keep a journal, which is pretty common, but what it allows you to do is export your journal out into different therapy frameworks. So if you are trying different therapists out and you went to a CBT therapist, you take that same journal and say, okay, maybe externalization or narrative therapy could work for me. Well, I can export that same journal out into the language of a narrative therapist. And as opposed to just reopening these wounds to retell this story, now it's almost like giving a resume and giving a resume in their native language. Uh, and I use that as that was the second thing that I've heard a lot about was the clinicalness of it or the clinical language. So I go into therapy and I'm like, I'm sad, I feel down. Well, the therapist gives me a diagnosis or a stigma, unfortunately, not meaning to, but now I come out with seasonal depression with manic episodes. And if I tell someone that who isn't in the medical, like mental health or psychology world, they may understand or they may not. For a lot of them, if they don't understand, then it just comes off as you have problems, you have a mental illness, or you're crazy, or something like that, something negative attached to it. And for those who understand, it's different. But in order for me to even engage with my own therapist, I now have to learn a whole different language. I need to understand what cognitive behavioral therapy is, what catastrophizing is, what all these different things are to even begin working on myself. I can't just use everyday terms that I already understand. So this has been a barrier for some people because they're having to learn all these different terms in order just to talk to their therapist on the same level to begin working through these problems. Was another really big friction point. And then the last friction point that I realized comes from the client side going in is that we go into therapy and we do what I call sanitizing ourselves. So when talking to you, if we were just buddies and hanging out, we're out in the real world and I may tell you directly how I feel about something. I could be like, oh, I have a ex and ooh, I hate her guts because she treated me this way or she was the most horrible person. And because we're outside of therapy, you can respond with maybe similar stories or other stories that you've heard about. And I don't feel as bad about what I'm saying. But when you go to therapy, therapists cannot interact with you in the same way and they can't tell you or share those same type of stories. So it feels very clean and sanitized. And what ends up happening is a lot of times we clean up ourselves because we feel uneasy about dirtying the space with that type of with those types of emotions. So I go into therapy and I'm like, okay, I hate my ex. Ooh, well, that doesn't sound very nice. I wonder what she'll think about it or what he'll think about it if I say that. Maybe I'll just say I don't like my ex. Okay, is that reasonable? Well, why don't I like them? Maybe it's something minuscule. And then it's like, okay, that doesn't feel like a justified reason. So I'll say they annoy me. You come to a cleaning of your language and then when you figure out what to say, now you're talking to the therapist. Well, my ex annoys me. And they're thinking, well, maybe this is something that can be fixed. So now you're working on a completely wrong problem. You're not working on the fact that you have this deep hatred of this person, maybe for justifiable or non justifiable reasons. But you're working on a problem that isn't the actual problem. and you never actually get help for the problem you need to get help for because you're sanitizing the actual issue because you're worried about how you're going to be viewed or labeled.
Yeah, I think those are all very valid points, all three of the issues that you have when you go into therapy, but it's also when you go for professional help of any kind. If you have a medical issue, you also have that same issue. You come to the next doctor, you have to tell your story again, re-traumatizes it, makes it a and so on and so forth, right? Then you get the next diagnosis or the same diagnosis explained in a different way, whatever it is, right? And it gets really tedious. So yeah,
Yep.
that's an issue you have with physical health issues as well, right? And then everyone has a different idea of how to solve it or not, or that it's not solvable, right? You might be told it can't be solved. Then you're in an issue. Okay, what do I do with that? Because for me, that's not a viable path, right? I can't live with something that can't find a new way of living with it, right? That I can be happy again or enjoy my life again, right? So it's a big problem too, right? So it's all, yeah. You'll get professionals say we don't have a
Yep.
solution, right? We don't have a solution. We don't know anything how to solve it, right? And so that could be very frustrating too, right? To
Yeah.
to to recognize, okay, nobody actually knows what to do, right?
Yeah, that would be hard. That would be hard, definitely.
Yeah, but that's the type of things people get when they go for help, right?
Correct.
And it doesn't mean that there's no solution, but it means that this person is saying there is none, right? Or okay, you have to live with a, or I mean, it's probably even worse when it comes to terminal illness, right? Okay, then the doctor's saying this is final, right? Right? Or
Yep.
the other idea, you have to go to therapy for the rest of your life. That's another one of those things you didn't mention, but I think that's another one that is very scary when you think of going to therapy, right?
Correct.
So, and then the thing of re-traumatizing, yeah, there's therapies that don't start out with the trauma, right? They start out with the solution, like the solution focused brief therapy, right? It's
Yep.
another way of going about it. So there's is a lot out there, and I think all those things you mentioned are very important. How to deal with that, right? Of course, the sanitizing. Yeah, that's true. You don't want to be viewed or diagnosed with a horrible diagnosis from which you have no way out, right? You don't want to hear that, right?
Correct.
But of course, one of the issues for healing, another thing you mentioned, you never heal alone, right? You never. So it's always healing for many people, even people you don't know, if you find a way to find another happier way of living, or to actually just go through the darkness and and be able to go through the darkness and be open about that. That's also a huge step forward.
It is. And I think, for me, realizing that when you go through something like that, it changes you, but it doesn't always have to be in a bad way. It allowed me to grow and see some of the perspectives that I had were due to, environments. Because I grew up in a time where, males, we didn't talk about emotions. You weren't supposed to be vulnerable as a male. You were supposed to be tough, not cry. You weren't supposed to show grief or tears, none of that. Um, and those types of stereotypes being perpetuated also affects the way that you handle things. And it really shaped, in my mind, what was okay. And I remember being so angry all the time and not really understanding why I was so short tempered. But as I found something, and again, when I tell people, writing worked for me unexpectedly, um, but drawing for some, music, different things may work for you. Uh, you may go back and look and start to look and be like, okay, well, I need to unlearn this behavior. I realized I needed to unlearn that I always had to be tough as a man. I can't show emotions and things because this was damaging to me and damaging to my children as well. Because I'm teaching them this behavior and now they don't know how to deal or regulate emotions properly. And they're not the only ones. So by me being willing to say, I'm okay with showing my emotions can help the next person say the same thing as you were saying because you're not alone. You're not going through this alone. There's a lot of males that grew up in that time that don't know how to openly express their emotions. They don't know how to say I care about you or check up, especially when it comes to another male friend. Like it's extremely difficult to be like I'm worried about you, man, because they never were allowed to express those types of emotions without being told it was wrong or it was weird or it was uncomfortable in some kind of manner. So learning that other people go through this and you go through it alongside other people and finding someone that's willing to speak up really does help. And it helped me seeing other people be able to be open and then learning that I can be open as well.
Yeah, that's really important. And another thing I want to put out there is writing doesn't have to be seen as therapy. It can be seen as creativity, as an expression of deep thoughts and so on. So it can it doesn't have to be seen as its primary function to be therapy, and it doesn't. And so I remember when or drawing or painting or whatever, right? There's people who may be therapists and will take your art and want to interpret therapeutically, and but you feel it's you have the experience that it's art, you're creating art, so that is not doing it justice to use the language of therapy to describe your art, right? So it depends. It's very important to make a difference there too, that it's not just it's not its primary function can be therapeutic, of course, if you choose that to be your primary function of writing. But as we see in your case, for instance, you want to help other people as well with your writing, and you also want to be able to share yourself authentically, right? And I like I said, I think fantasy has the means of also coming up with solutions that in what we think is the real world doesn't work, right? But the thing is, often when you allow a solution to be there in your imagination, later on it can translate into actual solutions because you just didn't know there was a solution, but there is, right? But in your writing, you wrote a solution into it. So you can actually start believing there is a solution, even if you don't know exactly how what it looks like.
That's a really powerful way of thinking about it. And you are right. When I was writing, it didn't come off as looking for a solution. It was really supposed to be just kind of a side gig, some way to make extra income. It was supposed to be like four friends, four swords, go say the Demon King, and a simple story like that. And the more I wrote, the more of myself that got embedded in it until it did become the solution for me analyzing myself. Uh, and it was really useful to me. And as you stated before, when it comes to finding something that benefits you, that calms you, that relaxes you, that helps you in any kind of way, it doesn't have to be therapeutic, um, or be used for therapy for it to work for you. I would say more specifically in my case, if I'm being correct about it, I'm not writing for a therapist, but there are times when I write, when I deal with heavy personal emotions, that I am aware that my writing reflects what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling internally at the time, that is useful for giving to my therapist to discuss or work through what I'm trying to work through. And then there's writing like the novel, where while I'm reflecting some of myself into it, I'm building this world, and I'm building around certain specific ideas that, if I was to give to my therapist, would give them the complete wrong impression of what's going on. And that's the creative side. So I've been able to kind of separate my uh, hobby or my relaxation in writing in kind of the multiple areas for myself. And it's been, really, really lovely. And I like the idea, like you said, about writing the solution, before you know it, because again, this just came unexpectedly to me, and I didn't plan it, I didn't expect it, and then all of a sudden I was like, this is making me feel better. I'm not quite sure why yet, but this is doing something that I didn't have for all this time, and it's doing it in a way that makes me want to continue it. And it became my solution to deal with all of my grief and trauma. And I just continued to build it out. And it grew into, from this small little plan or idea, to a complete universe, pretty much, where everything ties together in a way that, again, I'm involving other people, and uh, I'm involving ways to look at it from therapeutic standpoints that are working, and it holds. The world, the solution that just came out of my fantasy world holds and is able to hold other people, in fact. So the idea, like you were saying, that you can create your own solution is a pretty interesting concept that I really do like.
Yeah, another idea that I think is also important is that we already are whole. We are this the problem has already been solved. We just don't are not aware of that, right? And so the we're actually going deeper and discovering the solution that's within us. And another thing I wanted to comment on is that you said it's externalizing, right? From my point of view, there is no real external. It's all within us, right? So we're just being able to look at it in a different way, right? Look at it and so on. And I think that's what you meant by externalizing. You put it out there so that you can look at it in again, right, or differently. And I think also there's already a huge solution is expression. So even just expressing what's going on is already a solution in itself. So it's and it doesn't have to, and it has nothing to do with therapy or not therapy, because expressing is our nature, and not expressing is something that can be very harmful.
And I can see that, and especially for the time, like I said, growing up and what I was as a male expected to express and what I was expected to not express, uh, led to some of the way that I interpret the world and viewed it, and being able to look at that from a different perspective of that it's okay to express or okay to do these things, was helpful, was useful in for me figuring out how to best serve myself. And then also realizing there was things that I didn't work through or didn't think through, um, and I was able to start processing that or get to the point of processing that, was super important for me as well. Whether it was, childhood trauma, dealing with grief, and in some of the cases, even going along this path of writing and learning that, you know, there are people within this writing world or writing communities that could be, very mean. So learning how to decide for myself how to interpret, how to take some of the things they say and decide, okay, is this who I am, or how how do I want to express myself, and is expressing myself differently because of what they said true to me, or am I lying to myself, or would it be harmful to me? I had to think through some of those types of discussions and inner conversations as well.
Yeah, that's one of the beautiful things about communication, right? We get inspired and we get to know ourselves in more ways than we could have ever imagined, right? And so this, and I love a book called A Course in Miracles, and it speaks of relating with others, with each other. And there's two ways that it describes. One is the special relationship, where you think everyone thinks they're special and they need something from someone else in order to be whole or complete. And the other is to see each other as whole, the holy relationship. And this makes a huge difference when, and I think that one of the specialties of being able to openly communicate and share, and if you need it, use fantasy or imagination or whatever else in order to express it, because whatever means you have to express what's going on is important. You should use it, right? If so, there's some people who have a certain language to express themselves, and other have a different one. And sometimes we know multiple languages, right? I learned scientific language in anthropology. I learned pedagogical language. I learned artistic language. I've learned spiritual language, right? And so it's all, and various spiritual languages as well, right? So you see there's so many languages within the language, even when you're just dealing with one language, like English, for instance. There's all these special languages, like you were speaking of the therapist's language. Yeah, every therapy form has a different language, a different terminology, a different way of seeing things, a different idea of what is the solution, right? Yeah, it's a very important aspect also of writing, that you can explore the various ways. You can even make up your own terminology and have your own world that has its own symbology, its own way of expressing things, the own way, solutions, its own conflicts, and so on and so forth, right? That, and it's so powerful to be looking at things that way, to be allowed to do that, and that's already amazing. I think your statement that you were able to share things that you wouldn't have been able to share because of what you thought was right and wrong to share as a male in the community that you were at home in, right?
Yeah. You know, that was a big thing. You know, growing up in that type of community where you're not supposed to share certain things really did limit my growth and my ability to share. And the writing did a lot for me in multiple ways. It also helped me explain myself in ways that I couldn't explain myself in real life, as odd as that may sound, like with my wife. Because since I have depression, when I am depressed, I do think illogically. Um, and that's just a part of it. Like, I understand very clearly right now, I can sit here and say, my wife loves me, my children love me. If I was to die, there's no money in the world that would um, fix that for them. But when I am depressed, I do feel like I almost revert to the societal view of what a male role is, in being, you know, we're meant to provide and protect. So it's like, well, if I do pass, or if I do, you know, go another route, then the money provides for them. So I'm still fulfilling that duty. And they'll be fine because they only love me because I'm providing, is what my mind tells me during that time. And this was a really, really sore subject for me and my wife, because she couldn't understand how I could think that way at any point in time. Uh, Fantasy became a bridging point for me, as I would state that during certain times I would write what I'm feeling, and I would write about my depression, but I would write about it in a fantasy way. One of the folklore I did was called "The Threads You Can't See," and it explains, in a sense, of someone sitting in a dark room and they're tracing over these letters on the floor, and they've traced these letters many, many a times, that says, you know, I am worthless, and or what they believe to say that I am worthless, because they're tracing it, and there is a spot that feels, you know, dirty or more dusty, where they can't really make out what it is, but they're tracing over it, and they assume it just, the floor is confirming that they're worthless because that's what they're thinking about themselves. And then this simple thread, this golden thread, comes down and it lands on the space that they couldn't read before in the dark, and it says not. And the message was actually, I am not worthless. But that thread also illuminates that room just enough where they can actually see that they were in a room full of other people believing in them, supporting them, and they were surrounded by all this positive messages, but it's hard to see any of that when you're alone in the dark, or when you feel alone in that dark. And these types of folklore allowed her to kind of understand how I'm thinking, you know, where when I'm depressed, I'm like that person alone in the dark. It's not that it's not there, but I can't see it because I'm in the dark. And, as things progress and, I come out of the depression, it's like adding light to that room and I can see that you care and I can see these things now and it allows me to interact with it differently. So it really has helped my communication within my marriage, even where I feel like trying to just talk through it, as in I have depression or I'm sad, wouldn't have worked. But building it into a fantasy world where, we naturally remove certain limitations off of it, allow for this language and this communication to go through.
Yes, I think that's another one important thing is that every language has its areas where you're freer than in another language. And so, but there's also areas in which it's more restricted than another language. So, this switching into a language where you're free to express certain things that you wouldn't be able to express in the other language actually opens up allows you to explore and explain things that were inexplicable in the other language. So, so I think that's an important one. Like in the language of creativity and art, you can go very far, but then it has limitations in the sense that it says it's imagined, it's not real, it's a fantasy, right? That's a limitation because of course one's speaking about real issues even when you're using your imagination and fantasy, right? It's actually based on reality, on something real that's going on. It's a real thought, a real um, thing that is important to you, or in various ways. So then sometimes you need to switch languages, like you're doing. You switch to the therapeutic language where it suddenly gets meaning in the context of what is going on within you, and it becomes real, right? You get the stamp, it's real, right? And then you can switch to let's say a spiritual language where you suddenly can express things like, okay, all is happening for all of our good, right? You can say things like that, and say, yes, that's the way it is, right? And then you have this faith-based reality, right? So every language has its way of providing you with strength in areas that in the other language might not be available to you. So I think it's very important to be able to do that. And I love that you are using both languages, therapeutic language and creative language, right? Where you can explore things through what you've been expressing as fantasy, right? Or imagine. And so, yeah, it's really, really important. And I think that's one of the things where you can get out of your head is by switching languages.
Yeah, you're completely true, and it really did allow me to get out of my head because now, the first things I do is start writing folklore when I get really lost in my head. And sometimes it's not even necessarily me, it's just my interpretation of what may affect other people. Probably my biggest piece that I've written so far, I hired 13 voice actors and they voiced 13, 12 sanctums and a narrator. And it wasn't about myself, but it was about an event that I seen on social media of a child with a disability, and just how cruel adults can be to, a 6 or 8 year old child or so. And they said some very cruel things. And in my mind, I was wondering, if this child was to ever see this, 5, 10, 15 years from now, what would they think about themselves? and how would they interpret it? What would be the voices in their mind? And it became a piece that I named what the world calls it, and it goes through a lot, like 12 inner critics, that you may have experienced, which are my different sanctums in the way that they look at, um, different factors, what in their eyes make you worthy or worthless. And this came about from that experience where it was like, okay, this could be really what someone's feeling. And in my mind, I was like, I'm hoping I could build something that allows them to look at, even though, someone said this to you once, it hurt, different things that I can build in there for them to understand that you also have a choice in this, even if it's not easy, and not telling them, well, do this, this, and this, and it will fix it, but just bringing that agency of, these people said these things and they moved on, most of them in some kind of fashion, whether they passed, whether they changed, whether they just forget about who you are. Maybe they were drunk, but you're holding on to this and you're watering this negativity and growing it for them. And, you know, sometimes it's just help having someone help you step back and look at things or give you a different language to look at it from a different perspective. And you can kind of resolve things yourself going on from that point.
Yeah, it's a really deep discussion. I think we could talk about this a lot more, and there's so much to say about this. And another thing is not just the language difference, is also the state of mind you were speaking of. Like when you're in a depression, the world looks like this. When you're in a heightened state of awareness, the world is like this. When you're manic, the world feels this way, right? When you're happy, it feels like that, and everything confirms that. So that's one of the things. A Course in Miracles, for instance, shares how our mind is so powerful, right? And that's something that would never be taken from us, how powerful our mind is, right? But we do need to learn to discern things, right? Because you can, like you said, you can make things feel like they're facts because you were criticized, or you criticized yourself, or you felt unhappy about something. And you might make it feel like it's real, like it's a fact, but it's not, right? It's not true, except for that you've been giving it power. You've been empowering, like you said, you were watering the negativity, right? So the 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 importance here is that, and also in Course in Miracles, it states it like this: you can't change the world, but you can change your mind about the world, right?
That's a good one. I like that. And like you were saying, that's where I think probably my biggest healing has come from is, changing my interactions and what I believe I can do for myself and for others in this world. And that's became kind of the model behind me building the whole Vaelorin verse, is that I didn't have this world that I needed back then for myself. So I built it for you and I built it for the others. And that's became kind of the goal and the motto behind it all.
I think a common thread also amongst people who've gone through difficult things or have diagnoses or issues they're dealing with is that helping others has become their way to healing, right? So helping others who maybe have similar issues or other issues, but actually just being of service has been a huge, huge helpful part of their journeys. And I think that I've seen that with so many people that I've had here on the podcast as well, how that has changed a lot for them. So they, like you said, agency. Yeah, you give yourself agency, right? You give yourself the power to do, to be there. And what I thought another thing is, you don't have to be healed to be able to heal. You don't have to be finished in order to be of service, right? Because that's something where you can get caught up, and you have to be at a certain level in order to be able to be of service. And I've just, the common thread is wherever you're at is the most helpful.
And that's true because I'm nowhere near done healing, and it's been inspiring uh, and really heart moving to have multiple people, from voice actors to other podcast hosts, from first responders, to women who've had pregnancy loss, uh, tell me that my work has helped them process something that they may have tucked deep into their soul for several years, or brought a new perspective, or language, as we were saying, for them to work through. I had a paramedic talk about, um, he wrote a song, and in the same fashion, and it was something he needed to get off his chest, and it was really helpful for him to write this song, and that was his way of working through his uh inner turmoil and things. So to just have people kind of take from what you're trying to do to just benefit yourself and survive. And like you said, where I'm at, I wouldn't have, I'm nowhere near finished, but it is still enough to be helping other people and for people to be thanking me for helping them. So that I feel that statement you made is super important, and by no means should be glossed over in any type of capacity.
Yeah, and I think that's an important one to. So I'm very thankful that one can come from where one is at and be of service. And it doesn't matter how deep in the dark you are at that moment. That is not a reason that you cannot be of service, both to yourself and others, of course, right? By by being willing to engage, rather than lashing out or judging or attacking. You're willing to engage with what is here at this moment.
And that that has been one of the things that I try to really build myself around, because before having a way of processing this, I did find myself lashing out. And like I said, I was really angry for no reason. So, or at least let me rephrase, I didn't understand the reasoning behind my anger, because I was turning that grief, that trauma, those all those other emotions that I was told I wasn't allowed to feel, just became anger, because anger was something that was acceptable for me to feel. And that really changed the way I interacted with people. I tell some people, if you would have met me back in my teens and early 20s, you wouldn't have liked me very much, because I was a different person. I wasn't, you know, as thoughtful and, concerned with different, I wasn't concerned with how I interacted with people as much, because of what I was dealing with. So I do think it's important, whether it's whatever it may be for someone, to do something that helps you, understand your self and give you the language that you need to talk about yourself from a different perspective. And, as we discussed, it may be writing for some, it may be drawing, it may be music, art, sports, whatever it may be that gives you that language that you need, faith. Um, I think it's really important because I do feel like it allows, it doesn't, not saying it just fixes things, but it allows for things to be rearranged and built differently and viewed from different angles where you may not have been able to find a solution before. And then changing the view of the board gives you that opening and that solution that you need.
Yeah, I think one of the most important lessons we learn is we don't need to be fixed, because that's the big thing, that we think we need to be fixed. And yeah, there's things we may not be capable of. Okay. We may be capable of something else. Okay. And so on. We need to learn to stop this idea that we have to fix ourselves, and to start saying yes to what is there and what is available to us. And like you said, one of the big steps for you was learning to express what's going on, and to find a language in which you could express the things that you couldn't express in the other language, or in the other way you were dealing with things.
Yes. And, again, that wasn't during the time of finding that. It wasn't a attempt to fix myself, but it definitely was a survival, mechanism. Uh, just a way of getting through, the day or the next moment, because it really hit me heavy, and I wasn't really sure why. And I honestly, if I would have to think about, the time of the year and different things, but it hit me really heavy, and it was trying to survive, but it really, not looking for something to fix it, allowed me to be more willing to approach, various things, where normally if you're looking for a fix, you can definitely close off your mind from other elements that can allow you to express yourself in a more proper way, uh, or more, I won't say proper, a more aligned way, and maybe being what you believe would be your language to express yourself. And I always thought that I was pretty good at communicating and just understanding myself through my own internal thought process, but writing was a real game changer for me processing. And even just processing, not myself, but just conversations, like, the conversation me and you're having now, writing it and processing through it will allow me to look back and see things that I may not have gleaned as, during the moment. And then afterwards, it's like, oh man, I missed that right there. And I wish I could have went back and asked that question or looked at this. It's definitely just really eye opening to for that, I think.
Yeah, I think it's also, when we're thinking of needing to fix things, we can forget what we can overlook the solution. because you can't fix something at the same level that the problem is usually. So you do need a different, you need to let go of that idea that you need to fix something in order to actually find enjoyment. And at least that's something that I've discovered again and again, because I tend to like to want to fix things, right? But and I need to learn to let go of that idea that there's something that needs to be fixed, because it just gets in the way often of actually enjoying what I do have.
Yeah, I think that need to fix is definitely the human nature. And I believe that that is one of the things that has helped me as well with writing folklore, that don't fix people or don't try to fix people. That I like to use the term witness. It allowed me to witness things about people and not try to fix them. And it's a hard thing to do, because just sitting there listening to someone, pain in any type of way, you naturally want to be like, let me help you with that. And but not all the time are people actually coming to you to have this discussion because they want you to fix it. For some people, they just need to express it in a way, and talking and just having someone listen may be what they just need to have done. It's not that I'm coming to you because I need you to do anything about it. I just need someone to listen, because this is the language that I use to process and to understand myself and to work through things. And that has been really eye opening, as I learned so many people didn't, that I used to give answers or try to fix things for, wasn't looking for that. They just wanted someone to listen and witness.
Yes, absolutely, and that's a big point. Also, the point that we started with at the beginning is that you find out that other people understand, and you feel, and to be understanding doesn't mean that you've went through it, that you know exactly what the person went through or what they're feeling. Understanding can actually just holding the space can be enough. And so yeah, that's really really important. And yes, another, like we were speaking about writing, yeah, writing, the piece of paper is holding the space, and you just have, if you write it down, it's allowing you to have space for it, right? You're giving it space, and that means you're giving it expression, right? And you're not, and like we know with writing, even if in writing things repeat themselves or come again and again, it's different than when you have to slow down to write, right? You can't write as fast as your thoughts are going, so you need to slow down, and that is also part of the giving it the time to be heard, right?
Yes, and that slowing down have been important for me. And honestly, even it's been a mix for me, because one thing I've learned about myself is that I process things really quickly, and it's almost like I can't really work through it all without having a sounding board. So that writing has became the sounding board I needed, because I can write it, and then I'm like, there's something about that that doesn't feel right, and it's a feeling more so than looking at it from a intellectual level, or even a craft level. Like, you may read it and be like, that seems fine to me, but it's something that it's hard to describe, but it's that feeling that you're like, no, there's something off with it. And then I'll adjust it and play with it until it feels right to me. And it's important for me to do it in that manner. Um, but it becomes these different categories that I put it in of thinking about it, writing it, adjusting it, listening to it, and then thinking about it. It almost become like this little perfect harmonized synergy or uh, circle.
Yeah, it's a there's so many ways to go about it, and I think that's a really important to acknowledge. Yeah, I think I don't know if you have a lot, much more time, but we're coming to a point where we need to wrap things up slowly but surely. So, yeah, for instance, was on a podcast as a guest, and I spoke about the power of make believe. So, if anyone is interested in that, you can find a playlist that I put together on YouTube where you can find that episode where I was on someone else's podcast where I spoke about that. And I think it's very relevant to the topics we spoke about today. So thank you so much, Justin, for being here, for joining me, and for speaking about all this. And is there anything you would like to add that we haven't spoken about yet?
One of the biggest things that I try to just tell people, uh, anytime I end is the fact that, the scars you carry are just a map back to the time you almost broken and you're forged, not broken. Because a lot of people may listen to us and be like, well, I'm too broken to do that. And it wouldn't work for me because I'm broken or I can't be fixed. Or they think, like you said, they need to be fixed. And it's not. You've been forged, and being forged doesn't mean that you're fixed. It's just mean you're reinforced or you made tougher. And where you said, you know, you can still help wherever you are is, where I think people need to hear that and understand that you don't need to be fixed to help. You don't need to desire or, work towards being fixed, you know, anything of that nature, because, you're definitely not broken.
In the words of A Course in Miracles, you are infinitely valuable in the mind of God. So, yeah, thank you. Yes, I think that's a very important aspect of it. Yes, you already are perfect as you are to be able to be of service and to be helpful to yourself and others. So it's always worth loving yourself, and there's never too much loved. There's always plenty of love to give. And no matter where you're at, you are able to extend love because that's your nature, as you would, as we just expressed in different words.
Yes. So I believe that, honestly, what you said closes it beautifully, and I would agree with it.
So thank you everyone for joining us, viewing, and listening to this podcast episode. Please share about the podcast, review it, subscribe to it, let people know about it. There are 251 episodes at this point, so there's a lot to listen to if you're interested. And every episode has a short description, so you can choose if you want to listen to it or not, or watch it. And if you want to be a guest, please reach out to me and we can find a time for that. Blessings to you all, and till next time.